The body cam was already rolling when it happened. A black man stood on the shoulder of a public road, gray sweater, dark slacks, hands loose at his sides, facing an officer who had decided, without a single law being broken, that something about this picture was wrong. Behind him, a black Bentley Bentayga sat on the asphalt like a provocation, like an answer to a question nobody had asked yet. The officer's voice came first. "Sir, step away from the vehicle. Now." The man didn't move, didn't flinch, just turned slowly toward the officer with the kind of quiet that doesn't come from fear. It comes from certainty, and said the words that would eventually end up on every news channel in the country. "Because I'm black, I can't drive an expensive car?" What that officer didn't know in that moment, what he couldn't have known, was that the man standing in front of him held the power to erase everything he had spent 7 years building. His rank, his pension, his career, his future. All of it was already gone. He just hadn't opened the briefcase yet. And if you want to see exactly what was inside that briefcase and how one illegal search on a quiet afternoon unraveled an entire career, triggered a national headline, and changed a whole department forever, stay right here, because this story is only getting started. Hit that like button if you believe the law applies to everybody equally. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one, and let's get into it. The city of Harlow had a reputation, and not the kind anyone put on a brochure. Though for nearly a decade, the Harlow Police Department had been the subject of whispered complaints that eventually became formal ones. Formal ones that became federal investigations, and federal investigations that produced reports thick enough to use as a doorstop. 3 separate reviews by the Department of Justice. Hundreds of documented complaints from Black and Latino residents who described the same experience with the same exhausted precision. Pulled over without cause, questioned like suspects, searched without consent, and then released without apology and without explanation. Just sent back into a city that was supposed to protect them, carrying the quiet humiliation of knowing that nobody inside that department was going to do anything about what had just happened to them. The complaints were filed, they were reviewed, and in the overwhelming majority of cases, they were dismissed. The officers received verbal warnings at best, notations in files that nobody ever seriously read. The system had built itself a very efficient drain, and every complaint about racial profiling eventually found its way down it. Community leaders held press conferences, pastors wrote open letters, residents packed city council chambers and spoke for their allotted 2 minutes, and drove home to neighborhoods where the patrol cars still circled, and the stops still happened, and nothing changed. Trust didn't erode overnight. It collapsed by accumulation. One dismissed complaint at a time, one form letter at a time, one we investigated and found no wrongdoing at a time, until the people of Harlow stopped expecting anything different and started simply surviving the department rather than relying on it. By the time the city council finally acknowledged what everyone outside that chamber had known for years, the damage was severe and the options were limited. Promoting from within was no longer defensible. The culture ran too deep, and any chief who came up through those ranks carried the fingerprints of the system they were being asked to dismantle. An internal hire would have been an insult dressed in a uniform, so they looked outside. They needed someone who had actually done it before, not someone who had written policy papers about reform or sat on oversight committees and issued recommendations. They needed someone who had walked into a broken department, or identified the officers who were causing the damage and removed them regardless of how long they'd been on the force, how many union grievances got filed, or how loudly the old guard complained. They needed someone who understood that accountability wasn't a talking point, it was a practice, and it had to start at the top. The vote was unanimous. The announcement was made on a Tuesday morning in a conference room that smelled like burnt coffee and long overdue decisions. Harlow had a new police chief. And for the first time in a very long time, the people who had been filing those complaints had something they hadn't been able to afford in years. A reason to wait and see. Sam had never called himself a reformer. That was other people's word for what he did. The way Sam saw it, he simply enforced the same standards for everyone, which, in American law enforcement, apparently made him a radical. He had spent 23 years in the job, starting as a patrol officer in a mid-sized city 2 hours east of Harlow, working a district that had more in common with a pressure cooker than a neighborhood. He had made arrests, written reports, testified in court, and learned early on that the law was only as trustworthy as the people enforcing it. That lesson stayed with him. It shaped every decision he made from his first year on patrol to the morning he accepted the call from Harlow's mayor. The promotions came because he was good at the work and because he refused to look the other way when the work was being done wrong. That second part made him a lot of enemies along the way and earned him a reputation that preceded him into every room. As a detective, he had built cases with the kind of methodical precision that prosecutors appreciated and defense attorneys dreaded. As a captain, he had supervised officers with the understanding that a badge was not a shield from accountability. It was an invitation for higher scrutiny. He had disciplined officers who used excessive force. He had pushed through terminations that his own supervisors tried to soften into suspensions. He had sat across from union representatives in rooms thick with hostility and held the line anyway because the evidence was clear and the right thing to do was not negotiable just because it was uncomfortable. Word traveled. His name meant something specific in law enforcement circles. Depending on who you asked, it meant fair, or it meant uncompromising, or it meant dangerous if you had something to hide. Sam considered all three descriptions accurate and none of them a problem. When Harlow's mayor reached out, Sam didn't say yes immediately. He asked for the complaint data first. They sent him 3 years of files. He read all of it. By the time he finished, he wasn't just willing to take the job. He was already building the framework for what needed to happen inside the department before the first year was out. He could see the shape of the problem clearly. It wasn't a single rogue officer or an isolated incident. It was a culture of permission. Officers who had learned through years of unpunished behavior that certain things were simply allowed. Stops without cause, searches without consent, complaints without consequence. The department hadn't just tolerated racial profiling, it had quietly protected it. Sam accepted the appointment on a Thursday. By Friday, he had already decided he wasn't going to spend his first weeks behind a desk reading the rest of the files. He was going to go find the problem himself. He knew exactly how to do it, and he knew exactly which car to drive. The Bentley Bentayga was black, not dark gray, not midnight blue, black. The kind of black that caught light differently depending on the angle, that made other cars on the road seem to lean slightly away from it. Sam had purchased it 2 years earlier, the product of 2 decades of overtime shifts, saved paychecks, and a deliberate decision to own something that reflected what he had built over a career most people would have quit long before reaching his rank. It was also, he had learned through experience, a vehicle that made certain people deeply uncomfortable when a black man was behind the wheel. That discomfort was exactly what he was counting on. Sam's plan was straightforward because the best plans usually were. He would drive his personal vehicle through the districts with the highest profiling complaint rates. Civilian clothes, no badge visible, no department vehicle in sight. He would obey every traffic law with the kind of precision that made violations impossible. And he would wait to see which officers in his own department would manufacture a reason to stop him anyway. The first day, he drove through District 4 for 90 minutes without incident. then turned into District 6 and felt the change almost immediately. The way a patrol car he passed seemed to slow slightly as he went by, or the way it pulled out from a side street 2 blocks later and settled in behind him. The lights came on a quarter-mile down the road. Sam pulled over, kept his hands on the wheel, stayed calm. The officer, young, nervous, clearly uncertain, approached and asked for his license and registration. Sam handed them over and quietly asked what violation had caused the stop. The officer hesitated, admitted he didn't have a specific one, and returned Sam's documents almost immediately. When Sam identified himself as the new department chief, the officer's face went the color of uncooked dough. He apologized 3 times before Sam waved him off. The officer was honest about the stop and hadn't pushed further. That mattered. Sam noted his name and moved on. The second day produced a similar result in District 3. A different officer. The same basic dynamic. A stop without cause, a quick retreat once Sam identified himself, an apology that felt genuine rather than strategic. Another name noted. No formal discipline. These weren't the officers who were destroying community trust. They were imperfect, but they were reachable. On the third day, Sam drove into District 9. District 9 had more racial profiling complaints per capita than any other area in Harlow. It also had the lowest complaint resolution rate, meaning that the complaints filed there were dismissed more often and more quickly than anywhere else in the city. Whatever was happening in District 9 had been happening for a long time, and the department had spent years not looking directly at it. Sam turned onto Meridian Avenue at just past 2 in the afternoon, Bentley running quiet, speedometer sitting exactly at the limit. He had driven less than half a mile when he checked his rearview mirror. A patrol car was pulling out behind him. Officer Sean had been on the Harlow Police Department for 7 years, and in those 7 years, he had developed the particular confidence of a man who had never truly been held accountable for anything. He was 31 years old, white, medium build, with the kind of easy authority that came not from wisdom, but from the accumulated experience of never being seriously challenged. He knew the job well enough. He showed up on time, filed his reports, and maintained the surface appearance of a competent officer. His supervisors found him manageable. His fellow officers found him dependable. And the Black and Latino residents of District 9, the people who actually bore the weight of his instincts, found him exhausting in ways that no formal report had ever fully captured. Because the formal reports existed. That was the thing. The first complaint had been filed 18 months into Sean's tenure. A black contractor named David Osei, 38 years old, driving a Land Rover he had purchased legally and owned outright, stopped by Sean on a Tuesday afternoon with no stated violation. Sean had demanded proof of ownership, questioned Osei for 20 minutes about where he worked and how he could afford the vehicle, and searched the car after Osei refused consent, finding nothing. Osei filed a formal complaint the same evening. The complaint was investigated internally. It was dismissed 6 weeks later. Sean received a verbal warning that wasn't entered into his permanent file. The second complaint came 2 years after that. A black teacher named Marcus Webb, driving a used Audi he had bought from a dealership across town, stopped by Sean under the stated suspicion that the vehicle didn't match the neighborhood. Sean detained Webb for 35 minutes, ran the plates 4 separate times, and when everything came back clean, released him without explanation or apology. Webb's complaint was more detailed than Osei's. It cited specific statements Sean had made, specific questions he had asked that had no legal basis, and the cumulative degradation of being treated like a suspect for the crime of existing in his own car on a public road. That complaint was also dismissed. Another verbal warning. Another notation that went nowhere. Sean knew about the complaints. He had been told about them in formal settings by supervisors who delivered the news with the energy of people reading from a manual they found boring. There were no real consequences attached to the conversations, no retraining requirements that anyone enforced, no change in his patrol assignments. Life continued as it always had, which communicated something to Sean far more effectively than any verbal warning ever could. It told him the rules that applied to everyone else did not apply to him in quite the same way. That belief was still fully intact on the afternoon he spotted the black Bentley Bentayga moving through his district at exactly the speed limit, obeying every signal, giving him absolutely nothing. He pulled out anyway. Some instincts, left uncorrected long enough, he start to feel like judgment. Sam saw the lights before he heard anything. The familiar blue and red bloom filled his rearview mirror, and he felt the same thing he imagined every black driver in Harlow had felt in that same moment. A spike of something between frustration and recognition. The knowledge that what was about to happen had no legal justification and was going to happen anyway. The difference was that Sam had been waiting for it. He had driven into this district specifically because he expected this. And unlike the drivers who had come before him on this same road, he had the authority to make it mean something. He signaled, pulled over to the shoulder, put the Bentley in park, and placed both hands on the steering wheel where they could be clearly seen. He did not reach for anything. He did not adjust his mirrors. He simply sat, still, composed, and completely present, and waited. Sean climbed out of his patrol car and approached the driver's side with a gait that communicated more than it should have. Not caution, assumption. His hand didn't rest near his weapon out of genuine concern. It rested there as a posture, a visual declaration of authority intended to establish the power dynamic before a single word was spoken. He stopped at the window and looked at Sam for a moment that lasted slightly too long. Then he spoke. Not a greeting, not an explanation, a demand. License, registration, and proof of ownership. Sam turned to look at him with an expression that gave nothing away. His voice, when it came, was level and unhurried, the voice of a man who had prepared for exactly this conversation and intended to have it precisely. Good afternoon, officer. Can you tell me what violation caused you to initiate this stop? Sean didn't answer the question. He repeated the demand, louder this time, as if volume were a substitute for legal justification. Sam reached into the center console slowly, deliberately, retrieved his wallet and documents and passed them through the window. Sean took them and examined them with the performance of thoroughness, studying the license, checking the registration, looking from the photo to Sam's face and back again. The name on the documents was Sam. The Bentley was registered to Sam. Everything was exactly as it should be. Sean handed them back. How do you afford a car like this? Sam's expression didn't shift. That's not a question with a legal basis, officer. I'll ask you again. What specific traffic violation did you observe that justified this stop? Sean's jaw tightened. People who asked him that question were people with something to conceal. That was the calculus he had been running for 7 years, and it had never once been challenged seriously enough to make him question it. Step out of the vehicle. Sam didn't move. Not yet. He had more to say, clearly calmly for the record, before this went any further. Real quick. What country are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. We read every single one. And if you've ever felt the weight of being looked at like a suspect for simply existing in a space someone decided you didn't belong in, this story was made for you. Like this video, subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. And stay right here, because Sean is about to open that briefcase. Sam stepped out of the Bentley the way he had planned to from the beginning, slowly, deliberately, with both hands visible and his voice carrying every word clearly enough that the body cam on Sean's chest would capture all of it without ambiguity. For the record, I am exiting this vehicle under protest. I have not committed any traffic violation. I have not been given any legal justification for this stop. And I am stating clearly and explicitly that I do not consent to any search of my person or my vehicle. Sean told him to put his hands on the roof. Sam complied. Sean patted him down with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it hundreds of times. Shoulders, sides, waistband, legs. He found nothing, no weapon, no contraband. Nothing that would give him a single additional second of legal footing. He stepped back and looked at the Bentley the way a man looks at something he has already decided belongs to him. Sam's voice came again, the same controlled register it had held since the moment the lights appeared in his mirror. I do not consent to any search of my vehicle. You have no probable cause. I am stating this clearly for the record. Sean opened the passenger door anyway. He moved through the Bentley with the methodical determination of someone who was certain the justification was in there somewhere. It just needed to be found. The glove compartment first, papers shuffled and replaced. The center console examined and dismissed. The area beneath the seats, hands running along the carpet, finding nothing. Sam stood on the shoulder of the road and repeated his refusal twice more, each time precise, each time measured, each time landing exactly where it needed to land, on record, on camera, permanently attached to this moment. Sean moved to the trunk. Sam said nothing now. He watched. The trunk opened cleanly. Inside sat 3 items: a gym bag, a garment sleeve holding a dress uniform, and a black leather briefcase with polished hardware, and the kind of weight to it that suggested the contents mattered. Sean pulled the briefcase toward him. Sam's refusal of consent was already on the recording. What Sean was doing now, opening a closed container without a warrant, without consent, without a single legal basis, was not a gray area. It was a constitutional violation clear enough to cite in a first-year law class. Sean unlatched the briefcase and opened it. Inside was a single document, crisp and unfolded, printed on paper that carried the official seal of the Harlow Police Department at the top. Sean's hand closed around it. He lifted it out, turned it over, and began to read. The wind moved through the trees on the shoulder of Meridian Avenue. A truck passed in the far lane. The body cam kept rolling, catching everything, including the exact moment that Sean's hand stopped moving and the color left his face. He read the first line, then the second. His eyes moved down the page slowly, the way eyes move when the brain is refusing to accept what they are sending back. The document was printed on official Harlow Police Department letterhead, the seal he had seen on every departmental memo for 7 years, sitting at the top of the page with the same quiet authority it always carried, except this time his name was in the subject line. Printed cleanly, no ambiguity. Officer Sean, badge number 3847, notice of termination. The words sat in the center of the page in black capital letters that seemed to get larger the longer he stared at them. His hands stopped moving. The document stayed in his grip, but the grip had gone strange, too tight in some places, not tight enough in others. The hands of a man whose body had processed the information before his mind was willing to. He kept reading. The grounds were listed with the kind of precision that left no room for interpretation. Conducting a traffic stop without reasonable suspicion. Demanding proof of vehicle ownership without legal basis. Threatening arrest in response to the assertion of constitutional rights. Searching a vehicle after explicit and repeated refusal of consent. A documented pattern of prior complaints describing identical behavior, complaints that had been filed, reviewed, and dismissed without meaningful consequence. The termination was effective immediately. The signature at the bottom of the page was clean and deliberate. Chief Sam. Sean looked up. Sam was standing on the shoulder of Meridian Avenue exactly where he had been standing for the past several minutes, arms crossed loosely, weight evenly distributed, expression carrying the particular stillness of a man who had not been surprised by a single thing that had happened in the last 20 minutes. He was watching Sean the way a person watches something they built, waiting to see if it works the way they designed it to. Because it had. Exactly as designed. Sean's mouth opened. The question that came out was barely a sound. You're the chief?" Sam held his gaze for a moment that felt considerably longer than it was. When he spoke, his voice carried no anger, no satisfaction, no performance of any kind. Just 4 words, delivered with the flat finality of a door being closed. "You just failed, Sean." The briefcase, the letterhead, the signature, the 7 years of a career that had just been reduced to a document in a trunk that Sean had opened himself, without consent, without cause, without a single thing to justify what he had done, except the assumption that had driven every stop like this one, that a black man in an expensive car was a problem requiring explanation. He was still holding his own termination letter when Sam reached for his radio. Sam's voice on the radio was as calm as it had been throughout the entire stop. "This is Chief Sam. I need a supervisor at my location on Meridian Avenue immediately. I have an officer being relieved of duty." The dispatcher's response carried a beat of silence that spoke for itself before the acknowledgement came through. Within 4 minutes, a patrol sergeant named Rivera pulled up behind Sean's cruiser, stepped out, and took in the scene with the careful attention of someone who understood immediately that whatever she was walking into was going to matter well beyond this afternoon. Sam laid it out for her plainly: the stop without cause, the demand for proof of ownership, the threats, the search conducted after explicit, repeated refusal of consent, the briefcase. He told her where the body cam footage would confirm every detail and instructed her to have it secured as evidence before the end of the shift. Rivera listened without interrupting. When Sam finished, she turned to Sean and asked for his badge and service weapon. Sean handed them over without a word. There was nothing left to say that the afternoon hadn't already said for him. Sam drove back to headquarters alone. He called the emergency meeting before he reached his office. Every sergeant, lieutenant, and captain in the building was seated in the main conference room within 30 minutes, the air carrying the particular tension of people who had been summoned without explanation and had arrived trying to read the room before it was explained to them. Sam didn't explain. He pressed play. The body cam footage ran on the projector screen for 12 uninterrupted minutes. The room watched without a word. The demand for documents without cause, the refusal to answer a direct legal question, the threats, the search, the briefcase, the letter, the moment Sean's hands stopped moving. When it ended, Sam pulled up Sean's complaint history on the same screen and read both prior complaints aloud, line by line, in the same level voice he had used on the side of Meridian Avenue. David Ossie, Marcus Webb, the stops without cause, the searches without consent, the dismissals without consequence. Then he looked around the table. 2 complaints, same behavior, dismissed twice. And he kept doing it because this department let him. That ends now. Nobody in that room offered a defense. A few faces showed discomfort. A few showed something closer to relief. The particular relief of people who had seen the problem clearly for years and had never had anyone above them willing to name it in a room like this one. The press conference was at 10 the next morning. Sam stood at the podium in full uniform and told the truth without softening it. He named what had happened. He named the termination. He released the body cam footage publicly, and by noon it had traveled further and faster than anything the Harlow Police Department had ever produced. And national news desks ran it before the afternoon. The headlines were blunt and accurate, the kind of headlines that don't require explanation because the footage explains itself. Harlow exhaled for the first time in years. The union filed for arbitration within the week. Sean's attorney built the case around a single argument: that Sam had deliberately engineered the stop by driving an expensive vehicle through a high complaint district, and that the entire encounter constituted entrapment. It was the most defensible position available, and it wasn't very defensible. The arbitrator, a retired circuit court judge named Ellison, who had spent 30 years watching people argue about what the Constitution meant in practice, reviewed the body cam footage twice before the hearing began. He reviewed the prior complaints once. He listened to both sides across 2 days of testimony. The decision came back in 11 days. The termination was upheld in full. Judge Ellison's written ruling didn't leave room for a different interpretation on appeal. Sean had conducted a stop without reasonable suspicion, threatened arrest without legal basis, and searched a vehicle after consent was explicitly refused. The fact that the vehicle belonged to the police chief was irrelevant to the constitutional analysis. The violations would have been violations regardless of who was sitting in that seat. What the chief's identity added was not entrapment, it was documentation. Sean left law enforcement that month. He applied to 3 departments in neighboring jurisdictions over the following year. Each background check surfaced the same information: terminated for constitutional violations and racial profiling. Termination upheld through arbitration. No agency extended an offer. He eventually found work in private security at roughly half his previous salary, and his name remained attached permanently to the case that bore it, cited in legal briefs, referenced in department reform hearings, and shown in police training programs across the country as the clearest available footage of what a constitutional violation during a traffic stop actually looks like in practice. Sam spent the next 5 years building something in Harlow that hadn't existed before he arrived. Every traffic stop now required documented reasonable suspicion in the initial report, a specific, articulable reason, not a feeling, not an instinct shaped by the color of someone's skin and the price of their car. An independent oversight board reviewed body cam footage on a rotating basis, selected without advance notice so that officers knew on any given shift that their work might be examined without warning. 8 other officers in the department were identified through complaint pattern analysis in Sam's first year. 2 refused retraining and were terminated. 6 completed mandatory constitutional policing courses and remained on the force under structured probation. The numbers moved. Racial profiling complaints dropped by 71% within the first 3 years. Community surveys measuring trust in the Harlow Police Department showed sustained improvement for the first time in over a decade. Not a spike following a single news story, but a gradual, consistent climb that suggested something structural had shifted rather than something cosmetic. Sam still drove the Bentley. He still knew exactly what it meant when lights appeared in his rearview mirror. The spike of frustration, the familiar weight of a moment that shouldn't have to carry that weight. But when those lights came on in Harlow now, they came on for a reason. And every officer in his department understood, in a way that verbal warnings and filed-away complaints had never managed to communicate, that the reason had better be real. A black man in an expensive car is not a crime. A chief who tests his officers isn't setting a trap. He is doing the work that years of silence made necessary. And an officer who mistakes a badge for permission to ignore the Constitution will eventually meet the one person with the authority, or the evidence, and the will to take it back. Sean found that person on Meridian Avenue on a Tuesday afternoon. He opened the briefcase himself. If this story moved you, if you believe that accountability has to start at the top, that a badge is not a license to ignore the Constitution, and that the people who file those complaints and hear nothing back deserve better than silence, share this video with someone who needs to see it. Like it so more people find it. And subscribe, because we tell stories like this one every single week. Stories about the moments when power finally meets consequence and the truth refuses to stay quiet. We'll see you in the next one.